Sean Baker is an underappreciated filmmaker, period. It's not up for debate. Yes, he's had critical acclaim, but for whatever reason, he's kind of in his own lane, not just in style, but he's also never put in the same bracket as some other modern great American filmmakers. He's more of an outlier, but he's distinct not just in style, presentation, and tone. It's like the aura of his films feel very much like his unique trademark, and I'd argue that's very hard to do. I feel like outside of our Nolans, Andersons, and Hitchcocks, unfortunately a lot of directors get grouped together because their films, while they definitely have differences, they definitively aren't big enough differences to where most movie viewers can say, hey, I know who made that. Then he released Anora. Shot, edited, and produced by him, he won the Palme d'Or at this year's film festival. Anora has quickly become one of the most resonant and talked about films of the year. The premise is about Annie, played by Mikey Madison, who is a sex worker with a very on-point Brooklyn accent that on the most fortunate or unfortunate of nights meets Ivan, who is the son to a rich Russian family. And basically we follow them on their adventure of getting married and the consequences of their rash and hasty decisions. It seems to me that his work heavily attempts to destigmatize stereotypes through an empathetic lens, in particular sex workers and the less fortunate. Obviously, he's not the first director to do this exploration of sex workers to speak about things, but again, the difference is his approach and presentation are very much distinctly him, so they are far more memorable than other attempts that try to tackle the same subject matter. I mean, the fact that he was able to evoke so much emotion out of me from Dan of Scary Movie 5 is just unbelievable, considering I found zero enjoyment out of those scary movies. Just not my type of comedy. So to me, that's a tell of a director that knows what they're doing with the characters in their story, on top of the fact that it's a merit to Simon Rex and Sean Baker. Regardless of what you came out with from this film, it's undeniable that Baker didn't shy away from showing sex work at its most explicit. And that's clear with the fact that the film starts off at a 10 in the sense that it just throws you into Annie's world and her hustle. Obviously, the explicit nature really calms down in the second half, but I think that it was necessary for the movie to do that to really set the atmosphere of the film. It effectively obliterates the stigma that the subject matter is related to, but it does it in the most digestible way possible. But honestly, the thing I just wasn't expecting was how freaking funny this was gonna be. Maybe I was misled by the trailer, but I'm glad when a trailer is misleading or when I just can't put together the full picture of the movie through the trailer. I was also intrigued with the idea of a sex worker having a modern, twisted Cinderella story with a rich kid and it going wrong because of course it's not going to be that easy. When the elements of the Russian family and the goons were presented, I was skeptical at first because I thought, oh, this is going to veer way too far off. My god, was I wrong. The goons were hilarious. The entire crime plot didn't disrupt the pace or harm the mood. If anything, it just enhanced it. I tend to not really like comedies as a whole because I'm not the biggest fan of slapstick comedy or tongue-in-cheek comedy, which I feel like is often the case in modern comedies. But the comedy here felt more reactionary than anything, almost like it knew what the audience was thinking, and it felt self-aware enough to where it said it out loud. The timing and everything worked so well for like most of the jokes. They were very smartly placed and sprinkled throughout the entire film. And you really need a specific type of cast for a story like this to be so resonant and really grip the audience. Mark Idleston's performance, while initially seemed so immature and just like a spoiled brat that doesn't understand the hardships of life that a character like Annie is all too familiar with, his character isn't as shallow as you're led to believe. As the film goes on, something about his delivery really lets you connect with him, and you realize there's a certain suffering that he has to deal with too. It's also delicate. That's the thing about Baker. He can create a male character that can be so frustrating and insufferable, but at the same time so charismatic and electric and just likable. And funnily enough, you miss the negative space of his absence when he eventually leaves for the second half of the film. To me, it's a good sign when in a movie you're introduced to a character and you instantly feel their absence, not because the other characters aren't great, but because that character bounced well off of the others in the best way. Speaking of other characters, like I said before, between Toros and the goons, they brought a bright, zealous element to the film. Their comedy is more snappy and almost random, but I think that's the best version of comedy that works for me. If you can predict a punchline or a corny quip that's gonna be said, that just seems so lame to me, you know? Just look at Shane Black lacks The Nice Guys, which does this very well, and I find the comedy to be very similar in these films. Again, it's more reactionary.
Right, look, when you're talking to your doctor, just tell him you have a spiral fracture of the left radius.
No! No!
Deep breath.
I personally love that going against stereotypes is so prevalent in Baker's films. I feel like typically a crime movie involving lore of powerful Russians would have easily made them intimidating and dangerous. And while they may look like you'd expect, it completely goes against that. In fact, Igor is constantly being accused of looking stereotypical by Annie, and he kept proving her wrong. Hell, even Ivan's parents could have easily been shown to be bloodthirsty and use guns or whatever, but they felt antagonistic in a non-dangerous way, if that makes sense. Even when they show up on screen, you never really feel worried for anybody's life, and I really feel like Baker could have easily done that, and it probably would have worked, but I like that he chose this approach because it made sense thematically, and it felt unique and original. But the star of the show is obviously Mikey Madison. She brought a rawness and such a powerful intensity with her performance that you can't help but keep paying attention to what she's gonna do. It's truly magnetic. The physicality she brought to this was bonkers, she was scrappy, and had the fighter energy that this story really needed from its lead. She vividly conveys every emotion that you should be feeling in each scene. But more than that, the pain that ultimately culminates and implodes in the final sequence is just so visceral, real, and tragic. From the beginning of the film, you immediately understand that Annie has an opportunistic nature, but not in a bad way, just in the fact that to survive and move forward, she's had to learn how to see each situation she's been in and think how to get the maximum amount of benefit out of it. I really only had one problem with the film. I feel like as good of a character as Annie is, this type of character isn't the best suited for a story like this. For a while there, the film kind of drifts away from focusing on Annie and instead turns it into like a Where's Waldo scenario of looking for Ivan, and ultimately turns her into like an idle sim character for that time. The chaotic and layered story of the film works on its own because most of the characters adapt extremely well, but it felt like there was no thematic purpose for the hunt for Ivan, so maybe that's just me, but the meandering during that portion of the film was felt. I enjoy when we see characters just having fun on screen, the partying and all that was entertaining, but when they were hunting down Ivan and kinda did the same scenario play out in multiple locations, I just felt like we got the point of it, and yet we were still going. This small complaint was definitely not big enough to pull me out of the movie. It was just like the only outlier. Thankfully, this was only a problem for me in the middle chunk of the film. Her power dance with Ivan really worked for me in the first act, and the third act was shell-shocking to say the least. It's crazy how something can seem so funny, can also just really hit hard. It's tragic and leaves you clenched because of the abrupt intensity of it all. It's also tragic because you understand that it's just a defense mechanism for Annie's character, but the toll of basically being abducted and constantly told how little and powerless she is coming to a boil is just... oh, that's such powerful writing. I just love a well-written, miserable, yet pragmatic ending. I don't feel like I can speak on whether the feminine undertones are exploitative or disrespectful at all, but I will say that I felt that it was done in a very empathetic and tasteful way. And there's such a novelty factor to a director that's that hands-on, that's editing, producing, and of course directing the thing. There's just a sense of ownership, purpose, and intention that becomes unlocked when doing it that way. That's a form of investment that just can't be replicated. It's just crazy to think that this film is a favorite to win Best Picture. A movie about the exploration of sex work? It's just unprecedented, to say the least. Much like Peter Jackson's monumental win with Lord of the Rings, that was a film series that destroyed all its competition and was the quote-unquote nerd film. It's insane that a movie like that can win when during that era the Academy was so cynical and shallow, which they still kind of are. They made sure the fantasy genre was so belittled during that time, and yet it still won the damn thing. It's so fascinating, and truly I feel like it's a step forward that we live in a time where a movie like Anora not only has a chance to win Best Picture, but it's also a favorite. It's unreal. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.